Emily, what do you want to say? Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Just want to give folks a minute or two to get into the webinar.
And please do feel free to let us know where you're dialing in from, what organizations you're with. Yes, I'm at the Long Beach Library. That's a local. Someone knows this library that well. Let's see. Maybe Zara, you can help us also recognize who's coming into the chat and letting us know where they're coming in from.
Yeah, no, I just put in the chat. People feel free. Everyone, hi, I'm Zara Espinoza. They, them, she, her, Zer pronouns, and I'm currently in Chicago, or the unceded territories of the First Nations, known as the Council of the Three Fires. Looks like we have some people. LA area, we have people from our Nikkei coalition here, as well as we have Boston here. We have Washington. We have some fellow Chicagoans here. So much love. We have someone from the UK here. UK, awesome. Wow, 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 wow. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. Feel free to keep sharing in the chat, again, names, your pronouns, where you're calling in from, and maybe what you're excited about for this event, as I have been looking forward to this.
Yeah.
Oh, John, Jang, and Joyce Nakamura are here from San Francisco. Hola. Got some of the folks from Nikkei Progressives. Oh, wow, this warms my heart, everyone. San Diego, West Coast is coming in strong. Where's my Midwest people at? Yes.
There you
Hola,
go.
JJ. Yes, from Chicago.
All right. Thank you so much, Zara. We're at 5 minutes after the hour, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for this program. I just want to start off by saying that this last week has not been easy, and I've been sitting feeling heavy following the white supremacist attacks targeting Black folks in Buffalo, in my home state of New York. And it's been a lot to process, and moments of not wanting to process at all. But I'm grateful to be here with all of you. Thankful to share space today with the program's co-host, Tracy Kato Kiriyama, hear from musicians and activists John, Jang, and James Newton on their work together, and be joined in conversation with Kenniss Henry, Dreisen Heath, Miya Iwataki, and Akemi Kochiyama, who will discuss the movement for Black reparations, JA Redress, and how Japanese Americans can actively show up in solidarity for Black reparations and liberation today. So our hope is to continue to illustrate our strength together, that we will fight together to dismantle oppressive systems and support and care for one another. And that our collective liberation must be our goal, and that we will not be divided. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Miya Iwataki and Lisa Doi, who helped organize this program, and also the National Reparations Coalition. I wanted to share that we are joined by Sarah Yukimoto Saltman, who is a facilitator and graphic recorder, and will be graphic recording this conversation today. So look out for the visuals that come following today's conversation and program. And now I'll pass it to Tracy, who will share more on the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition and what we've been up to. But before that, I want to explicitly state that the chat is meant to introduce ourselves, collaboration, inquiry, and that also personal attacks in the chat will not be tolerated here. And if we do see it, you will be removed. And also that if you would like to enable closed captions for the call, for this program. If you go to the bottom of the bar and click on CC, that will be available to you. And with that, kicking it to Tracy.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you so much for steering this whole program and bringing us all together. My name is Tracy Kato Kiriyama. My pronouns are they and she. I'm calling in currently from the Billie Jean King Long Beach Public Library in Los Angeles County, Tongva Land. And yeah, you know, we strategically positioned this particular day in a couple ways. One, you know, with this particular week, we wanted to recognize Thursday, the 19th, as the birthdays of Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama, and a big force of inspiration and education for all of us for many, many years in terms of what it means to really engage in solidarity or work as a practice in life, as a life practice, right? So we also are thinking about that there's been a big shift in strategies that, you know, Kenniss and Dreisen will speak on more about calling for an executive order for a commission, a federal commission on reparations. And, you know, the strategy behind that we'll get into more through the panel. But we have called and made a demand for the Biden administration to make that executive order by Juneteenth. So we also wanted to support and participate by establishing this week of action a month before that deadline. So we have so much work ahead, but we're kicking it off through our coalition. And this coalition, the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition, it just came together in the past, I would say, month or so. But it's built off of our organizations across the country. We have San Jose Nikkei Resistors, Nikkei Progressives, NCRR, Portland JACL, Seattle JACL, Pseudo for Solidarity, Chicago JACL, and National JACL. We've been working together pretty actively over the last year and a half. And so we thought we should just, you know, call it, make it official, and bring in more people and try to engage not just, you know, dozens and hundreds, but hopefully eventually thousands of us across the country, you know, into this really important movement, into this work. So, you know, we have, this is our big kickoff. So thank you for making it to the big kickoff. We're going to record it. We hope you will share it out with folks. You know, we understand it's a Saturday, so we, you know, please share it out more so that we can really, you know, get this beautiful program out to folks. And then we're going to have a workshop on Monday to get more into some education and the strategy to move us towards this executive order. And then Wednesday, the 25th, we're gonna have a day of action that we invite you all to please join in on. We have 5 one-hour sessions from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. East Coast time to make calls to the White House, to do email, and to also get on your phones. And we're gonna do some, you know, social media blasts. So we really want to increase public awareness as much as possible as well. So with that, we're going to get into the program. And I have the privilege of introducing really quick. We're going to read her bio later, but Miya is going to be introducing our 2 musician guests. And Miya, for me, is a hero, a veterano, an OG, a big sis, big sibling. And so just, I love you, Miya, and thank you so much. And we're gonna pass it to you now.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm a big sibling, but I am on a diet right now, trying to deal with it. And Tracy is like a dynamic driving force behind Nikkei for Nikkei, National Nikkei Reparations Coalition. And I just want to thank you for all of your tireless work on this. But it's my pleasure now to talk about how music and culture can inspire and energize, build harmony and solidarity between communities, and move our struggle forward. And so today we are honored in our inauguration day to present the words and the works of 2 internationally acclaimed musicians who, to me, personify Black Asian artistic collaboration. They are also very busy, but we were able to catch up with them, and we'll be playing excerpts from insights they both have shared on music, solidarity, reparations, and their 40-year friendship and collaboration. Just a quick shout out to Lisa Doi for editing all of this together while in Amachi in snowy weather last night. First, we have composer, pianist, band leader, Jang. He has a huge list of accomplishments that you should look up on his website that we'll be putting up in the chat. I'll just mention one of my favorites, Reparations Now, Concerto for Large Ensemble and Taiko for his ensemble, John Jang and the Pan-Asian Orchestra. This pays tribute to the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations and 40 Acres and a Mule for Black Americans, and was performed in New York, Seattle, Vancouver, Italy, and Germany. John has such wide and vast works, and we're really privileged to have James Newton. Not only has he topped Downbeat Magazine's International Critics Poll, they voted Newton the top jazz flautist for a record-breaking 23 consecutive years, so you know how good he is. So Newton's work also encompasses chamber, symphonic, choral, electronic music genres, compositions for ballet and modern dance, and numerous jazz and world music contexts. He also has an impressive list of accomplishments that you will find on his website. Well, John Jang and James Newton are currently collaborating on a new work commissioned by UC Berkeley and the Walker Center, and we're anxious to hear that. First, we'll start off with John Jang sharing a cut from his current recording, The Pledge of Black Asian Allegiance. It's a sampling of a tribute he wrote to Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama, and includes spoken word by poet Amanda Kemp, using quotes from Yuri Kochiyama's speech. The segment here closes with a beautiful piece with James Newton and John Jang performing in South Africa right after the release of Nelson Mandela. Please enjoy.
Today, and I have the great privilege and pleasure of talking about my brother, John Jang. John Jang and I met in the early 1980s and immediately realized that we had so much in common. And among those things was a deep respect for each other's cultures. And we started to collaborate right away. We played a number of anti-apartheid rallies. John came with me and played performances in Black Baptist churches. And he played gospel music with authority because he learned it from the source. And he came humble. And he added his culture to it and did new things with it, as he's done with the Black music tradition. And what has made our collaborations so sustaining is the fact that we both took seeds and we planted it in fertile ground. And I think when you look at Yuri Kochiyama and Malcolm X, you can see that occurring and the impact of that. Here we are dealing with it all these years later.
In Of Sorrow Songs, The Cross of Redemption, an essay written by James Baldwin, he wrote, "This music begins on the auction block." So that's where this music comes from. During our 40 years of friendship with James Newton, we always had to be conscious and on guard of white supremacy. And white supremacy is not just about hate groups. They're definitely white supremacist groups, but white supremacy is a socio-political economic system of domination. And so white supremacy tries to divide James and me, tries to divide Black people and Asian Americans. I want to talk about what was very important in our friendship and relationship is that it's been, you know, the importance and value, actually, the value of long-term relationships. And I think also about the value of self-care. And what I mean by self-care is collective self-care, meaning that how we look out for each other, how we take care of each other, how we understand each other's needs, and we're there, always there for each other. In that context, I'd like to kind of tell you that I used to be an activist in a BIPOC organization. And that BIPOC organization was led by the great Yuri Baraka, who was the father of the Black arts movement. And that organization dissolved in 1990. And like many of the cadres in that organization, we burned out because there was a kind of a martyr sensibility to our work. And so we didn't really take care of ourselves. We didn't really take care of others. It's not that black and white, but it was that, you know, it was about the struggle comes first. And so, you know, I was in that organization for about 8 years. And so I feel that, you know, we do have to take care of ourselves. This is not just, this is a long, protracted struggle, that we used to say. And in the 40 years relationship and friendship that I shared with James Newton, we've always took care of ourselves. We always look after ourselves. And so I think that was why we were able to survive for so long and make music. We're going to listen to excerpts of my composition, Yuri Kochiyama, Malcolm X. My music composition pays tribute to Malcolm X and Yuri Kochiyama. After Malcolm X's visit to Yuri Kochiyama's family apartment in Harlem in October 1963, Yuri Kochiyama underwent a transformation from an integrationist to a revolutionary internationalist. The melody of this composition is based on the 9 syllables of their name. Yuri Kochiyama, Malcolm X. Yuri Kochiyama, Malcolm X. So say their names, sing their names.
Life is not what you alone make it. Life is the input of everyone who touched your life and every experience that entered it. We are all part of one another. Don't become too narrow. Live fully. Meet all kinds of people. You'll learn something from everyone. Follow what you feel in your heart. So transform yourself first, because you are young and have dreams and want to do something meaningful. That in itself makes you our future and our hope. Keep expanding your horizon. Decolonize your mind and cross borders. We're gonna be alright. We're gonna be alright. We're gonna be alright. We're gonna be alright.
Now, reparations for me is just for the Black community is gigantic. One story I wanted to tell you is the fact that up to my mother and my father, to my knowledge, all of my family since abduction from Africa have worked in the fields. My grandmother and grandfather were sharecroppers on my mother's side. My father was adopted, so we don't know. And the way that the Black families were attacked and of course the abuses we're all aware of. And I have to go back to Abbé Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism, when he discussed, which was a huge book in the Black American community in Los Angeles when I was a young artist trying to come up, and how he discussed how these evil actions rot the oppressors. And we see it today in our own country, how people that look like all of us that are discussing these issues have a target on our backs, you know? But getting back to the point, I worked in Niger, and this was maybe about 2000, and with some incredible musicians, and we played in the capital in Niamey, and then we went to Paris to do a big concert after that. And they were so excited to introduce me to the main griot in Niamey, somebody they had the highest respect for of all. And it was hard to get his time. So finally, I came to the meeting, and I was honored to meet the gentleman. I bowed my head in respect. And he started to ask a couple of questions. He said, and the second and third questions was, were your ancestors slaves? I said, yes, they were enslaved. And he got up and walked out of the room. That was the end of the meeting. I can't go. I can't take my children. I can't take my grandchildren where my ancestors came from. We're guessing, even, you know, because the technology is still not refined to the point where we can truly know 100% where we came from. They took that away. And to not know your full root or your full identity leaves a hole inside of you. So, of course, we embrace all of Africa. But I had to share that point. Now, getting to South Africa, John was initially invited, and because of his awareness and his understanding of things, he said, a Black American artist has got to come with me if I'm playing Black music, you know? And again, this goes back to the respect of the cultures that has to come both ways to where you have that fertile soil. You know, you build a tree out of the same trunk on a certain level, you know? And so we played in the Chinese community there. We went to Soweto and got to see memorials, and we went to the Black church where I heard spirituals, and I'm thinking I'm at my old church in South Central, you know, LA, and seeing the fact that there were parallels, and it was just so deeply moving for John and that was the first time that I had stepped on African soil. I was the first of all of my ancestors to step on African soil again. And the fact that Nelson Mandela had just won the presidency and the election, and we were there. But John is my brother. I love my brother. And what we've built together has sustained us through decades, and the friendship lasts because we're both trying to grow, and we keep bringing enrichments to the soil. And we know how to listen to one another. And for us, just as the victory occurred for the JA community, for reparations, we want to see it occur for the Black community, whose price keeps getting higher and higher.
That was super amazing. I don't know if you can see me on the screen, but oh, wow, that was brilliant. And, you know, it made me think a lot about when we have shared values and shared practice, the ways in which we break bread together, when we create together, when we struggle through together. And I think about this particular space too, the new friends, the old friends, the people that we have memories with for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or 20, 30, 40 years from now, you know, the memories that we will have together. So yeah, that was just brilliant. And thank you, Miya, for bringing that in. And yeah, so beautiful. I loved all the comments in the chat. Please, you know, give your you know, your blessings and your gratitude, and we will make sure to share it with both James and John. So thank you so much. Okay, we're coming to a really beautiful part of our program. I'm super excited to introduce, bring Emily back on the screen, who will be moderating our panel. And I love that this panel is going to be a nice, juicy 60 minutes. Sometimes we have panels, right, in community, and we want, you know, to pack in so many things, and then we kind of like cut the time. And we have so much quality, so many amazing speakers today. So I want to just, you know, bring on Emily and just shout out that Emily is a lead organizer with the New York Day of Remembrance, with Sudo for Solidarity's reparations work, and of course with our National Nikkei Reparations Coalition. I have to say she is also a vocalist, and she recently joined the Resistance Revival Chorus. So I'm excited the things that we will get to create together artistically, and yeah, so I'm gonna send it to you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And even though John and James weren't able to join us today, just want to give a big thank you for sharing their powerful statements and music with us. And now I'm so honored to introduce our panelists, Kenniss Henry, Miya Iwataki, Akemi Kochiyama, and Dreisen Heath, who will join us in conversation to discuss the movement for Black reparations, Japanese American redress, and how Japanese Americans can show up in meaningful solidarity in support of the movement for Black reparations now. And so first, I'd like to introduce you all to Kenniss Henry. Miss Henry has always been an outspoken community activist on her college campus, to being a supporter of the Black Panthers, Move People for Justice effort, and active organizer with Acorn until it was dismantled. In 2010, she ran for the United States Senate on the Green Party ticket, and she's always been a staunch supporter of reparations and began her reparations advocacy over 10 years ago with the Washington, D.C. Reparations Study Group, and onto the activist group Black Reparations Now, and from there to the Empowerment Research Group responsible for monitoring and lobbying key federal legislation pertinent to African Americans. She joined the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America and COBRA in early 2017, although she had been supportive of their legislative efforts towards HR 40 for a long time. As a member, she was appointed as the National Legislative Commission co-chair and orchestrated a key strategy in the coalition's legislative efforts that contributed to the most successful co-sponsor support in the history of HR 40. Ms. Henry is in collaboration with many reparatory justice organizers and groups, and have leveraged the groundswell of support for HR 40 as they await a response from the White House on next steps. We're also joined by Miya Iwataki. Miya helped build the people programs inspired by the Black Panther Party with the JACS, Asian American Involvement in Little Tokyo, the Asian Movement Center during the 1970s. She's an advocate for women. She became the director of the first Asian Women's Center, was a delegate to UN Decade for Women Convention in Nairobi, Kenya, sponsored by the United Nations NGO, and on a women's healthcare delegation in China. With NCRR, she fought in the grassroots campaign for JA Redress/Reparations and worked with Representative Mervyn Damali, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She's a poet, a writer, a KPFK FM radio producer of East Wind and Malcolm X Day specials, a columnist, and her life experiences have informed her lifelong cultural and political activism. She's a member of Nikkei Progressives and the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition, fighting to win Black reparations in the ongoing struggle for justice and reparations today. And as the vice president of Little Tokyo Historical Society, she's working to preserve the history, legacy, and cultural soul of Little Tokyo in the face of gentrification. We also have Akemi Kochiyama. Akemi is a fundraiser, writer, scholar activist, and the granddaughter of civil and human rights activist Yuri Kochiyama. Akemi currently serves as the director of advancement at Manhattan Country School. I think County School. She is also the co-director of the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Fund and a co-editor of Passing It On, a memoir by Yuri Kochiyama. She's a proud graduate of Spelman College. Akemi is a doctoral candidate in the PhD program in cultural anthropology at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, where her dissertation, research, and writing focuses on the impact of Yuri Kochiyama's personal practice and political philosophies regarding community building and BIPOC solidarity on activists, educators, and artists doing this work today. And finally, I'm pleased to be joined by Dreisen Heath. Dreisen is a research and advocate in Human Rights Watch United States program focusing on racial justice issues. She's a Tulsa-born reparations activist and strategist with an expertise in reparatory justice. Heath has authored research reports and publications highlighting victims' rights to seek full and effective reparations that are proportional to the gravity of the human rights violations, as dictated by international human rights law. She's actively advising and providing counsel to community-led reparations processes at all levels, including within private industries and at the city and state levels. She testified as an expert witness several times before United States Congress and has provided testimony and commentary to municipal governments. Heath's writing and thought leadership on the ongoing impact of settler colonialism, structural racism, racial inequality, and the necessity of comprehensive reparations has been widely quoted and published. Outside of work, she spends her time in her community, supporting people without stable housing, organizing against police violence, and finding joy in the struggle. Okay, a lot, but such amazing work that you all have done, and I am just so grateful to be in conversation with you all. So I wanted to start off the conversation by asking Kenniss a few questions. And I was wondering if you can share more about how the movement for Black reparations has grown and taken shape over the last decades and beyond.
Sure, thank you for that great question. And I have to say, I'm still experiencing butterfly flutters from the musicians. That was just amazing. As far as the history of Black reparations and how it has grown, most people are familiar with a couple of names from the 1700s. So quickly, we had Elizabeth Freeman, commonly referred to aka as Mom Bet. And in 1781, she actually sued for her freedom and damages. She was able to get her freedom and they awarded her 30 shillings. This was in the state of Massachusetts. And the very first thing she did was she wanted to be free of the stigma of enslavement, and she changed her name. That was her way of declaring that she was free. At that same time, there was a male who was promised his freedom. He had the papers that when he turned 25, he would become free. However, at 28, he was still enslaved. And during the same time that Mom Bet was suing for her freedom, he too was suing for his freedom. And his name was Quock Walker, Quock. He also won his freedom, and he won the right to receive compensation for damages. Now, the person that most people are most familiar with back during that time is Belinda Sutton, or often referred to as Belinda Royale. And Miss Royale sued for an annual pension, which becomes probably the first reference to any kind of reparations. She was manumitted, also in Massachusetts. She was elderly, and she had a handicapped daughter who she was responsible for, and no skills. And she sued in 1783 for an annual pension, and actually was awarded that pension or reparations. Others that we are familiar with are Miss Callie House and Mr. Isaiah Dickinson with the Mutual Relief Bounty and Pension Association. And their primary focus was to get pensions for newly released enslaved people. And surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, there were many pension associations trying to do the same thing. However, Ms. House and Mr. Dickinson is the one that is most popular and most famous. I'll speak a little bit more about them in a minute. What I do want to talk about are a couple of pieces of legislation independent of Sherman's field order. Thaddeus Stevens introduced a bill, the Land Redistribution Bill, HR 29, to give land back to the newly freed enslaved folk. And as you know, the bill failed. However, what's important is what he said after discovery that the bill actually failed. And that was, he made the statement that destitution comes as a way of not having the means of a livelihood or to be able to earn a livelihood. And he said, as a result of that, those destitute individuals will become the victims of the hatred of the rebels they helped to conquer. So what he's saying is that they are now destitute, and because of their destitution and inability to earn a living, those they rose up against and fought against, crossing from the Confederate side to the Union side, will now hate them because of one, they're destitute. We all know that with convict leasing and sharecropping, but also they would be hated because they did fight against them. And another piece of action that needs to be discussed is in February 1902, the Commissioner of Pensions wrote because there were so many pension organizations trying to get pensions for newly freed ex-slaves. And he said that he blamed the ex-slave pension organizations for the arousal of false hope, for reparations for the historical wrongs that were done to them, and to be followed by the inevitable disappointments, and probably as a result of that, the distrust that they would begin to feel towards the dominant race as well as the government. This happened in February 1902. Interestingly enough, in 1892, 10 years prior, the Italian Americans, 11 Italian American families were awarded reparations by the United States of America. The president, without HR 40 and 99 years of trying to get it passed, gave each family $25,000, which today would be worth about $725,000. And then the president said, that's not enough. I want to do more. As a result, he then declared a national holiday, a national, air quotes, Italian American holiday in the form of Columbus Day. So we have had reparations in some form or other for years. Now, as far as Black reparations is concerned, coming forward, we have such folk as Queen Mother Moore. We have such folk as Reparations Ray Jenkins. He is the person who was relentless with Congressman John Conyers. Every time you saw him, you need to do a reparations bill. Black people need a reparations bill. And that is how HR 40 came about. It has been in Congress for well over 3 decades. And there have been legislative sessions when there were 0 co-sponsors on HR 40. And for about 8 years, it was known that you could not talk about reparations because the West Wing would be offended or embarrassed. So we've had the ups, we've had the downs, and currently we are looking at 215 supporters of HR 40 on the House side. With the bill sponsor, that's 216. On the Senate side, the companion bill, we have 22 supporters, co-sponsors, and the bill sponsor. And in the 116th session, the session prior to this one, we actually closed out with 173 co-sponsors. Sadly, none of those numbers are going to be able to get us to where we need to be. However, that's the synopsis of the history of reparations in this country.
Thank you so much, Kenniss. I think it's really important for us to understand that Black reparations organizing and political action for Black reparations has been going on for many decades. And with that said, over the last decade, so many of the political wins and momentum of the Black reparations movement has been driven in part by the work that you do. And so I wanted to hear a little bit more about what brought you to becoming active in the movement for Black reparations, and also what has that work looked like over the last 10+ years for you?
Wow. What brought me here, wow. First of all, I was born in the great state of Virginia, and Virginia is where all of this got started. I saw what it's like to be a person who is discriminated against just because of the color of your skin and the coarseness of your hair. I also grew up at a time when there were, in the antebellum South, it was not uncommon for the local police force to put the water hoses on children and set the dogs on children. And those are the kinds of things that you don't forget. And I guess more importantly than that, why I'm in the struggle, from the time our ancestors were stolen and sold, we lost approximately 2 million ancestors. They're at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and never has there been any sort of formal service or ceremony to honor the loss of those lives. And I am in this struggle because incidents such as that, which is not just an incident, it is it's just it's a crime, we have to get justice for those things. And I came from a training class to here, and I watched a rerun of Birmingham and the dogs in the water. That was 59 years ago. And someone said, wow, the world saw this, but the world saw it 59 years ago. And today, last week, we saw the Buffalo shootings. So 59 years has not moved this country towards doing the right thing. So that basically is why I remain in the struggle for reparations.
Yes. Yes, this country has such a long history of violence that is indisputable. And I am grateful that our Japanese American community can be in the struggle with you as we push for Black reparations, which are so long overdue. So thank you so much, Kenniss, for giving us a really thorough foundation for on the movement for Black reparations and sharing more about your background and what brought you to the movement. And now I'd like to move to Miya, who, many of the folks who are part of the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition have mentioned that the work to advance and get Black reparations is building off the legacy of the Japanese American redress movement, that it's continuing to dismantle white supremacy and doing that work. And so, Miya, I was wondering if you could share about the Japanese American redress movement as someone who is active in it, and also how Black organizers informed your activism, and also the Japanese Americans community's activism and organizing for the struggle for JA redress.
Okay, thank you, Emily. And thank you, Kenniss, for sharing all of that information. And just to give a quick snapshot, on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, condemning 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry into concentration camps. There were no protests, no petitions, no vigils for us. We were alone, and it changed our lives. And the tactics used to implement Executive Order 9066 were really brutal, and many seem reminiscent of today. And just a kind of snapshot of it, we suffered family separation. Many of the men were visited by the FBI in the middle of the night, taken away. Some people, and I think Akemi will talk about this with her great-grandfather, some people were either never seen again or came back, decimated and very ill. There was an economic loss. Homes, farms, and businesses were literally stolen. We lost our family history and our family legacy. Some folks, like on the Terminal Islanders, were given only 48 hours to pack what they could carry. Other people buried, and sometimes they burned their precious heirlooms and keepsakes rather than have white racists take it over. There were health issues. The hastily built barracks were not built to withstand the cold or the heat or the dust storms coming in, and our people suffered cancer, asthma attacks that developed into esophageal cancer. There are a lot of stillbirths. Some of our women were given tubal ligations without their consent. And there was the psychological trauma. My mom was born in Manzanar, and my dad was in the 442nd, which was an all Japanese segregated army unit that suffered more casualties and won more medals of valor than any other army unit of its size in the history of the army, while their loved ones were imprisoned behind barbed wire. But mom and dad didn't talk about camp. In fact, most of our Nisei parents did not talk about camp. And that price of silence really traumatized us and passed through generations. My generation, the third generation, because I believe that our parents felt deep inside that this could happen again. So we were told, keep a low profile, don't call attention to yourself, be twice as good, work twice as hard. We were becoming an invisible minority, and it was really suffocating. And then came the 60s and the 70s, and it was like being freed. We were inspired by the civil rights movement, by the Black Power movement. We saw for the first time oppressed people standing up, finding their voice, and marching for justice. And we were inspired by leaders like Martin Luther King, as well as Malcolm X and Fred Hampton, who were rising in armed self-defense against white supremacy, as well as building serve the people programs like free breakfast programs, free housing, free childcare, the types of programs that the government is supposed to be, providing some help in that area. And for us in the Japanese American and Asian movement, we modeled ourselves after the Black Panther programs, and the Black Liberation movement set the stage for the Asian movement. And that's where I found my voice, fighting for social justice, through watching and learning from my Black comrades. Then President Nixon started to see, that third world unity developing, and he revived Title II of the Internal Security Act of 1950. Title II would have opened 6 concentration camps specifically for those posing a threat to national security. And this was only a few years after we were released from camp. So of course, Japanese Americans had to take a stand on this, and under the Black Panthers, SNCC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, ACLU, and other organizations were all mobilizing, and through a national mobilization, we were able to get Nixon to repeal Title II and not open those camps, although today you can see they're still trying. Well, at that time, we started learning, and thinking more about camp, because our parents never talked about it, history books never talked about it. So it was just incremental learning about that. And the more we learned, the more we were angry and knew that we had to, fight for justice. And so for many of us, we wanted to see, for many of us, we discussed what would Japanese American reparations look like. And there were many opinions, but for many of us, we felt that we wanted to see immediate monetary reparations because we were worried about our parents and our grandparents who were getting really old. And I wanted to see my grandparents win reparations. But there were differences of opinion in the community. And so many of us that had our base in the Asian movement formed the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations. And we wanted to see monetary reparations now, a presidential apology, a community education fund. And we also had those goals, but given our background in the Asian movement, we also had some principles we wanted to carry out. We saw the campaign for redress and reparations as kind of helping to build a grassroots movement in the community and to continuing to build solidarity with other communities of color through our work and to fight other injustices as we saw them. And those were the principles of NCR. Those were the principles we gained from the movement and the principles that ultimately came from the Black struggle. And so we're very, thankful for that. Also, as we started, we continued to work in coalition with a lot of movement organizations, and we met folks from the Republic of New Africa, like Akinyele Umoja, and we learned a little bit about Queen Mother Moore and about the Black reparations struggles that had been going on. And that, informed us a little more. And then ultimately, when we were doing outreach, we met Congressman Mervyn Dimely, who was the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus, and he represented Gardena, the city of Gardena that had more Japanese Americans than any other city in the United States outside of Hawaii. And he was immediately on board with Japanese American redress and reparations. He met with us, offered to introduce a bill calling for monetary reparations, which was introduced, but we knew that it probably wouldn't pass because there was another bill that was proposing a presidential commission to study whether or not there was an injustice committed during the camps. And we'll get to that later, but that's how NCRR first formed, and who we learned from and who we appreciate.
Thank you so much, Miya. I think it's so important that we honor the impact that Black Power organizers and movements have had on informing the way that the Japanese American community has showed up and organized. And with that, I wanted to talk to Akemi and hear about what your experience was growing up in a revolutionary activist home, seeing solidarity modeled in your community and throughout your life, and how that informs the work that you do today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd say for me, seeing solidarity and living in multicultural community in all aspects of my life was just really normal to me growing up. You know, I didn't realize how unusual that was until later when I went to college. I grew up in Harlem in the area known as Sugar Hill. I lived briefly with my grandparents in the Manhattanville projects. And I spent my time pretty equally between my home in Sugar Hill on 153rd Street, which was a multicultural tenement apartment building with lots of single moms and lots of kids, and we, you know, from different backgrounds, and it was a great sort of place to grow up. I also spent a lot of my time in Yuri and Bill's home in the Manhattanville projects on 126th Street, where they entertained guests 365 days a year. And I was a part of that just whenever you were in the house. And then also my father's family is from the Queensbridge housing projects in Long Island City. Also a very large, very tight family led by a matriarch, also very multicultural. So I grew up, you know, in all of these sort of environments simultaneously in the 70s during Black Power. My father was a Black Panther. My stepfather was a Black Panther. So growing up, you know, with that sort of family background and within the Kochiyama family, I think my cousin Zulu and I were constantly either hosting and helping at an event at the Kochiyama home, or we were attending community events, political events with our parents, or Yuri and Bill, or whatever uncles or aunts were taking care of us that day. You know, everybody's, you know, working, right? So it's like, you know, whoever's available were babysitting us, and at a time in my family, those people were usually at some kind of political event or cultural event when they weren't at work. So we often attended several different kinds of political or cultural or community events in a single day or a weekend. Sometimes it was a meeting for a Black nationalist organization or a cause in Yuri's apartment, or a cultural event or a political event in the Asian American community, or a march against nuclear power, or a grassroots theater production in Harlem or Chinatown. In all of these spaces and in all of these various communities, I think I always felt in all parts of my family and all the extended families that I, you know, existed within at that time, I always felt safe, seen, supported, like I belonged. I was also expected to participate, you know, from the time I could walk and talk, I think, in my family and in this broader community. If you were a child in the room during an event, you were expected to march or to listen and be quiet, or to chant when you were supposed to, or to just be helpful and respectful. I saw a tremendous, extraordinary level, amount of love and joy amongst people living in multicultural community all the time. It wasn't a thing. Like, I didn't understand that that was like a thing to live that way until I left that little bubble, went to college. And then I started to understand, like, a lot of people didn't have that experience. I'd say my mom, Aichi, who's Yuri's third of 6 children. She and her siblings were all, you know, Sansei, third generation Japanese Americans who grew up in Harlem with really progressive parents who were fighting for civil and human rights alongside their Black and brown neighbors and friends. And while Yuri and Bill were also supporting and engaging in the Asian American movement and many different BIPOC movements and communities. So this was all happening sort of simultaneously as I was growing up. I'd say as I'm the eldest grandchild of many. I spent a lot of time, Zulu and I spent a lot of time with our grandparents, you know, from the time they were babysitting us to our teenage and adult years. And I'd say over the decades, I think I watched them entertain thousands of guests in their home. Like I said, 365 days a year. They literally had an open house Saturday night party for a couple decades, 60s through the 80s. I caught the tail end of it on board in 71. But anyone in New York was invited to come to these parties. And it's an incredible thing. And people often talk about solidarity and how to build community. And I'd say one of the most basic things you could do is open your home to people. And Yuri and Bill did that constantly. I mean, whether that was having people over to eat or to come to a meeting or to sleep there because they needed a place to stay. And I know it sounds like it is a big risk to take to open your home to strangers, but I watched them do that over and over again, you know, thousands of times. And the return on that was a lot of love, you know, mostly, you know, almost completely. So I think between helping out at events they hosted at their home and tagging along with Yuri on her marches and speaking at events for more than 30 years, I think I got to do that. I think the most important thing I got to witness, I think in that context, was their sort of extraordinary generosity, hospitality, openness, but also to see and feel like this incredible return. Like I said, all the connections they made, the lifelong friends and extended family they gained, all the love and trust that was generated outward, I think exponentially. I still see and receive that love back, that some of the people that they did things for decades ago. I think it all comes from their genuine interest in and openness to all kinds of people, right? From all walks of life. And I think that's really critical, you know, to understand, like they were really about humanity. Yuri was really about humanity. She was especially inspired by, I think, and meeting and greeting and engaging and talking to young people and college students. I was lucky to travel with her a couple of years after I graduated from college. She was on the college speaking circuit, and I was, you know, available. My grandfather had passed away, so I ended up traveling with her. I ended up like editing her speeches and booking her engagements, and incredible to see how incredibly tiring it was to do this, but how many people showed up and how engaged she was and inspired by them she was. And I think ultimately I understood, like it was like it gave her hope actually, and it was like it gave her like a fuel, you know, to keep going, you know. You know, it's like, think a lot of people think of you as like really tireless, and I think it's because of all the love she got, you know, from people. It really, it helped her keep going. I think that all of that had a dramatic impact on the work I do for a living. I'm a fundraiser in a school with a social justice curriculum. It actually is Manhattan Country School, not county school. It's called Country School because we have a farm in the Catskills, and part of our whole social justice program is having kids spend time at our farm in the Catskills and work together running a farm, right? And so equity and shared leadership and all kinds of community building skills are developed through that process. So that's why the school is called Manhattan Country School. But you know, that's a big part of the work I do. That school was founded in response to Brown v. Board of Education, right? By a bunch of educators and activists who were trying to envision, you know, what would MLK's, you know, vision of a place where there is no racial majority, where the teachers, the board of trustees, the students themselves, that there's like intentional socioeconomic diversity. What does that look like? What kind of people would that produce? So I went to that school, I work in that school. So it's very aligned with the life that I was having growing up. And I think that experience, like personally, and then of course the school I went to and where I work and the space that I work, I think it has a lot to do with my understanding of what's happening in this country right now and the world at this moment in time, and why we're launching the Yuri Kochiyama Solidarity Fund right now. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but I hope I answered your question.
Appreciate it. Yes, you did. I'm definitely resonating with that. A lot of this work is rooted in relationship. and that it's important to find love and joy in this work as well, and something that it's important that we find space for in this solidarity work that we're doing. And so I'd like to kind of bring the conversation back to Black reparations and move to Dreisen. And so Dreisen, you've been, one of the leaders alongside Kenniss and others who've been instrumental in building the HR 40 coalition and moving the struggle for Black reparations forward. So I was wondering if you could share with us more about what brought you to the movement for Black reparations as an activist, scholar, and strategist, and also how you build upon the legacy of the movement for Black reparations over these decades and longer in your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. And, this space is giving me much needed energy this Saturday, running below E. And so I appreciate all of the energy fostered already and all of the energy I'm gonna thus receive after the fullness of this conversation. And then just the music medicine of James Newton and Jang was beautiful. So thank you again for this space. I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans. And so for me, it's my existence is living proof of the fact that my ancestors' resilience and their sacrifice. I've navigated life kind of consciously, but also blindly, in the fact that I just feel, whatever comes on me is my life's purpose, and whatever moves me in what way is my life's purpose. And so I often reflect about even being here, despite attempts to clear us all out and keep us under. But I'm committed as well to preserving the humanity of my people. Each year, I feel like, we have to continue to build on that. And so I think in the search of belonging that we are in our lifetimes, the reparations movement, I believe, is somewhere I belong, alongside my dear Kenniss and others. And so just coming to that realization, though, is a political act. It's not one that you are necessarily born into. It's a consciousness that you have to develop, and there's layers to that consciousness. And so learning about Belinda Sutton or Belinda Royale's petition to the Massachusetts General Assembly in the late 1700s, right? So many people talk about post-emancipation efforts. Learning that there were concentration camps in the US prior to there being rightful outrage and denouncing of concentration camps in Germany, and concentration camps, including in the place that I was born, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they rounded up Black Tulsans after they attempted to murder or successfully murdered Black Tulsans and burned down their entire prosperous Greenwood 40 square block community. Learning, in college that Haiti had freed themselves from violent settler colonialism and then had to pay for their freedom. And so that they weren't targeted by war again by France, not to mention the US purposefully destabilizing Haiti over decades. All of this knowledge, and then you come back to the US and not only did they enslave us and exploit us, but then we built capitals and other government buildings from which they now legislate from to criminalize Black life further. And so I don't think I have a choice but to be in this movement and in this space. And I also happen to work at a human rights organization that should be in this fight because it's the right thing to do, first and foremost, and because also the right to remedy and reparation is as clear as day in international human rights law, which is our mandate. So continuing to build on this legacy in particular, I think existing is just building on that legacy. So much of just what we're able to do today is because there were some of our ancestors were able to survive. But in addition to that, there are organizations and entities that have been dedicated to realizing racial justice, right? But they haven't necessarily connected the dots with reparations being a necessity of that mandate. And so, even thinking about our coalition work and the fact that, Black leaders have been for decades pounding this home, right? To the point where people were, ignoring these requests despite the requests being clear as day. And also recognizing that nothing that we've ever achieved collectively as marginalized and oppressed peoples has come without getting support from each other. Just look at the activism in the 60s and the 70s as a testament to that. In every movement prior, no movement has rendered, progress and agitation without the support of other communities. And so knowing that need and needing to build and be connected to people, ultimately what saves us is our people power. And so how do you build that with people who are already like-minded, but may just not have connected the dots? And, the uprisings in 2020 was an opportunity to bring people together in a space where not only are we mourning and sharing grief together, consistently, but especially in this moment, but we can be active. We can use those feelings and actively disrupt a space that has kept us under. And so building this coalition of now over 500 participating organizations that are participating at different levels, some really active in legislative work and building on HR 40 and helping us get that over the line. Some also doing really intentional work within their communities around education and around political organizing. And from the grassroots to national organizations, how can we realize this? HR 40 has always been I see it as an organizing tool, right? This commission bill, as important as it is, being in Congress for 32 years. And here we are at a moment that it has the support it needs to advance, at least in the House. And yet we're facing deliberate obstacles to not realize it. And so this is going to take each and every one of us to knock down structural walls that were built to keep us out. And, I'm just grateful for, the opportunity to build this, and continue to build on what has already existed and the resistance and strategy and taxes that have already existed, but also recognizing that there is a need for new strategies, for new allies, for, new times and tactics. And that is okay. And that will mend and blend with the fight for resistance that we've all come into currently.
Yes, thank you so much, Dreisen. Yeah, I'm sitting with so much that you've said, how coming to this realization and being in this work is a political act, how existing is building upon the legacy of this work. And I'm also thinking about how any person's commitment to racial justice must be ensuring that Black reparations are given. You can't have one without the other. And I think it would be great to also hear more about what is the strategy of the HR 40 coalition right now. And also, what are the ways that Japanese Americans can and Asian Americans can stand up and support the HR 40 coalition and also the movement for Black reparations. And I'd love to hear from all folks, especially Kenniss, Dreisen, and Akemi here, but also Miya too.
Kenniss, I offer the floor.
Okay, let's have the question again.
I hear you. That was a lot. So first one to start with, if you could share more about this current strategies of the HR 40 coalition.
Wow. Currently, the strategy is to continue to build momentum, to continue to have groundswell for the work that we do. And we recognize that there's no way we can get HR 40 legislatively through both houses. So our letter to the president, definitely we need everyone on board. We need everyone reaching out to the White House to signal that it is absolutely critical that he signed an executive order, HR 40 executive order. And to be honest, it's to stand up a commission. It's not as if we're asking for $50 trillion to be distributed in direct payments. We're asking for a commission. And this country is famous for commissions, tasks. They have tasks, they have teams, they have work groups, you name it. And this country is popular, famous, and ready to do it. While we even have, I think it's a commission to study aliens in outer space. So if we can have a committee or a commission to do that, we certainly can move forward and acknowledge the pernicious history of this country. And as I said earlier, the early commissioner for pensions actually admitted when he said, that he was blaming the ex-slave pension organizations because they were arousing false hope for reparations for historical wrongs. And just the mere fact that he said for historical wrongs, he was admitting guilt there. So for this country to continue to not to want to do the right thing, then the coalition is bound by a commitment to push forward and to let it be known to the president as well as to our elected officials, because this is not just a message to the president, this is a message to our elected officials. And we have to be able to send the same sort of message that was sent sadly about the death of George Floyd, the very tragic death of George Floyd, when everyone came to the streets and they let their concerns be known. We have to go back to a time where we have that level of support, and we have to be able to send a message to the president that we are at that time now, and what has to happen is that the coalition has to stay united, and we appreciate the support of our Japanese American family because there's no way we can do this all by ourselves. We cannot stand in isolation when the only way to victory is we have to have unity. So as far as the coalition is concerned, that is our goal, and we have to be able to move in that direction. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here for a minute, Kenniss. I think that the commission was a very impactful, thing for our community. So when we talked about like in the 60s and 70s, the Asians found their voice. It was like the third generation, and we still had this kind of like silence 40-year silence on the part of our people that had actually lived through the camps. And so when our commission bill passed, the Commission for the Presidential Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, I thought that the direction of that commission might just be to emphasize research, which would include academicians, legislative, quote unquote, noted figures from the community. And as a people's organization, NCRR felt it was really important for our parents and our grandparents, for our communities to tell the story in person and not just from books. So we met with each of the presidentially appointed commissioners to tell them that if you really want to have meaningful hearings, you need to go to cities that have a significant Japanese American population. And each one, we lobbied each one, and we turned out to be able to have 20 days of hearings in 10 different cities and 750 testimonies, which was really great. In Los Angeles, NCRR, we helped to set up the hearings to make sure, that our people would be able to get in. We needed translators, we needed transportation. A lot of people needed help because how many of our, elders have actually testified or even given a speech in public, let alone before a presidential commission? And for me, it was life-changing. Those testimonies educated my generation about camps. Our people that testified put a human face on what that concentration camp experience was like for ourselves and for the world and for the nation. And I believe that those, having our people testify and tell their stories and not have like a political agenda, but just to be out there and tell the truth, speak the truth about what happened. It's a very unifying experience. And now when I think back on it, every story and every testimony, it was like they ripped off all 750 of them. They ripped off layer after layer and exposed a core of institutional racism and white supremacy. So you can't hear 750 people talking about the same thing and walk away not thinking, man, this country, has some problems. And I believe that, we began to see the roots of some of these problems, and that it just bound us together, and it gave our community a voice. It made people angry, it made people want to do something, and it was like breaking a 40-year silence. And it was very important because our community found its voice. And then with that voice, after the commission came out with the findings that the basis for the camps was race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, and our members of Congress introduced a bill, calling for $25,000 in reparations, presidential apology, and a small, it seems small to us now, community education fund. And so that was a really important experience for us. And I'm just gonna add one other thing, that with that, that energy and that voice that came out of those hearings, we launched a legislative campaign. And I feel for what you guys are going through now, because it was torturous. We didn't face anything like, 30 something years, but for us, even 5 or 6 or 7 years was a long time, because our elders were already in their 90s and we were losing them really, really fast. And so after about a 5 or 6 year stalemate, Congressman Mineta called us up and said, the big vote is finally coming down. This is it. This is do or die. NCRR, you got to pull out all the stops. And so NCRR went into organizing mode, and we worked to have 141 people save up their vacation money and their money and their vacation time, and they all went to Washington to lobby for that bill. And that grassroots delegation changed the lives of the people that went. And it was really, not only did we ultimately achieve winning Redress and Reparations, but it was an organizing tool for our community, and the lessons learned from that, carry over to today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Miya, for sharing more about the value of the commission for the Japanese American community, and also the power of, sharing our community stories and raising our voices. And I think the biggest piece is that, or something that I'm thinking about, is that we need to emphasize also the reparatory justice. So, what does that look like for Black communities who have been impacted by the vestiges of enslavement? And I think that, one of the ways that I would like to think about how the Japanese American community can build upon the redress movement, which is to further dismantle white supremacy and support the movement for Black reparations. I was wondering if maybe Dreisen, Kenniss, and Akemi can share more about what would be your call to Asian American and Japanese American communities to take action to support the Black reparations movement during this very critical time.
Well, since Ms. Dreisen hasn't spoken, we'll let her speak first.
Thank you for your graciousness. A Tony K. Bambera quote has been stuck with me all week, and the revolution begins with self in the self. And so I believe that work has to be done and is active work in order to also be active in this particular movement. It really does. It looks like spending time with people in the community. I've gotten to spend, what is not enough time, at least in California with some of you here. That time and that sharing and that fellowship is life-giving, and we need to do more of it. It looks like organizing across issues, right? If we're focused on dismantling white supremacy, then we got to be focused on all of the vestiges, and that includes fights on housing and community redevelopment, like issues that you are all working on, that we need to connect the dots on. It also looks like, putting your body on the line and putting your time on the line. Being involved in this active coalition is wonderful, and also helping us push the limits here, right? How docile and relatively quiet do we have to stay in order for this to get done? Like at some point, there's got to be, as people took to the streets and were saying reparations now in 2020, it's got to take a massive mobilization of people to say reparations now as the main message, right? Because people should be in uproar that there is a bill that has the support it needs to pass on the House floor, and it is intentionally not being put on the House floor. That should be outrage for every single person. And so, all hands on deck. I see a question in the chat, I'm just because of stream of consciousness here around California's process. And knowing that a lot of you are California based, I believe that you all need to be involved in that process. And in terms of community education about what reparations is and how California's task force mandate is to look at the vestiges and the ongoing harm of enslavement And therefore, this divisive lineage model that has now been adopted by the California Task Force is actually going to do more harm than good. And so we need you all in California to be organizing around community education. I know that there are some anchor groups that are already, kind of mandated by the task force, but all information out here is not good information, and we have to be real about that. And you also, it's a hostile, volatile space, and that comes with the nature of this work. And so, when I say body on the line and mind on the line, that's exactly what I mean in terms of we are not a monolith. It's going to take different avenues to get there. And we should be voicing different strategies and tactics, but the misinformation has to be combated. We know what the reparatory justice process is, and part of that too cannot then inflict the cannibalization of each other, right? Because then how exactly is that achieving liberation? How are we achieving any sort of healing if we're allowing our collective trauma to play out in the ways that now we're excluding a whole groups of people from a reparations process that could be, potentially and significantly impactful?
So I'll jump in here for a second. I agree with everything Ms. Heath has said. The only way we can move forward is in unity. I talk about my air quotes Japanese American family all the time, and you cannot imagine the responses I get. I didn't know you were related. How are you related? And then I have to take the time to explain to them the relationship. So more conversations where we are displaying the unity across racial lines has to happen. There is no way that 46 million people of African descent can make this happen. And in the Washington Post, I think yesterday, there was an article that said HR 40 is flawed, HR 40 needs to be scrapped, HR 40 is the wrong way to go. And the intent of the article was that reparations must just be a check, that it needs to be a direct pay, needs to come from the federal government, nobody else should be involved. And as Ms. Heath said, a lot of that is misinformation. For example, in a recent subcommittee hearing on Capitol Hill, it was said that financial institutions cannot afford to make restitution for their role in the enslavement of our ancestors. There's no reason why they can't. One bank alone, Morgan Chase, has about $5 or $6 trillion and about $289 billion in equity stock. So why can't they make restitution? And if we took all the financial institutions and we added up their worth, I'm sure it's in the mid to high trillions of dollars. Bad information, we have to be vigilant about putting good information out there all the time. And as far as the direct pay is concerned, of course, we all want to see some level of direct payment, but a direct pay does not heal the societal wrongs that exist in our communities. For example, in the past 2.5 years of COVID-19 and the lockdown in Baltimore, Maryland, we're being told that our children are at least 2.5 to 3 grade levels behind because they did not have the continuation of education in the classroom with a teacher standing there directing their education. In Scientific America today, they came out with an article that said discrimination. They did not say discrimination as it relates to people of African descent. it said discrimination of people of color is the main reason for heart disease. So those things cannot be fixed with a check. And as far as lineage-based reparations is concerned, I was born and raised in the great state of Virginia where all of this started, and I can trace my my ancestors back probably 4 or 5 generations. But I have an ancestor in my lineage whose name is Henny Penny. Nobody knows who she is. I have an ancestor named Zippy Scrappy. Who is Zippy Scrappy? And I'm supposed, the burden of proof is on me to prove that I have ancestors who were enslaved. That's not fair. You're putting the burden on the victim to be able to prove that they deserve to have reparatory justice. And that is not how this should work. And we should never, ever be in a situation. I watched a lot of AB 3121 hearings, and it was primarily about, I'm finally going to get my inheritance. I'm going to get my legacy wealth. And what that does is it just shuts out so many other groups of injured parties who are never, with that mindset, never going to be healed, because it's being limited to a very small group of folk. When if we admit it, we're all injured, we're all hurting, we all have harm, and it has to be healed. And it must be healed by the government, who is the greatest perpetrator of this pernicious history that has us where we are. And it continues even to today. Those 10 families are hurting, and it is as a direct result of the white supremacy mindset that continues to flow into those communities. And as I said, yet again, Thaddeus Stevens said, without proper livelihoods, the fear is that the victims will become the recipients of the hatred of the folk who they rose up and fought against in order to get their freedom. And that is still the case. We are still hated. They stole us, they brought us here, and they had one purpose for us. And after that was no longer the case, then they had to come up with ways to keep us on the bottom, not even on the ladder, but in this hierarchical society, we don't even see the first rung on the ladder. And this country continues to refuse to acknowledge that slavery, the institution of slavery, birthed the triplets of racism. So there's so much that has to be done. And we have to align ourselves with our Japanese American families, but we also have to align ourselves with our Jewish American families. We have to begin to do more to bring in other ethnic groups and other racial groups, because we all have the same story. We are all being injured by the same complicit actions of the government. And until we can all get together and say, we're standing up as one, and we are making it known that you must change the paradigm, you must change the narrative of this country in order to be able to say that there is equity, there is equality, and in so doing, perhaps even there is freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenniss. And you're absolutely right that we need to stand as one, that we need to come together to shift the paradigm, make systemic changes, and also get the reparative justice that is owed. And so, you know, we've heard from Dreisen and Kenniss, and previously Akemi, you shared how the Japanese American community can show up. So, you know, I'm saying that we are taking note. You've told us how we're going to show up, and we'll continue to challenge ourselves, educate our community, and take true public and strong action in support of Black reparations. And so to close off this amazing program, I've learned so much. It seems like folks in the chat also have shared that they have learned so much from you all today too. I just like to close by asking you all, what do you envision Black reparations to look like? And how do you hope to get there? So we can start with maybe Dreisen, and then we'll go through everyone.
Thank you, Emily. I mean, part of why I even feel this commission is necessary is to understand why reparations are owed for current injustices, just as much as they are for our past, and the institution of chattel slavery, Black codes, Jim Crow, lynchings, massacres, war on drugs, you know, you name it. But the fact that reparations are owed in relation to Black maternal mortality and infant mortality, the rising suicide rate among Black youth, lower life expectancy rates, devastating environmental impacts. And so what, you know, reparations looks like to me, harms have been multifaceted and on multiple levels. And the remedies need to be proportional. So yes, that means financial compensation, but not just a figure that calculates lost slave wages, but also calculates ongoing employment, banking, and other forms of discrimination that tap into our pockets. Return of land, which is also a conversation, you know, I think specifically of Black farmers or Black landowners, particularly in Oklahoma. Obviously, these are conversations that we also need to have in concert with Indigenous communities, because white slave owners don't have land if Indigenous and Native people weren't murdered and dispossessed on that land to house plantations and other explicit degradation of people. So return of land, return of property, return of artifacts. There's things sitting up in museums that probably, you know, that people have been trying to claim back. Remains that people are trying to preserve. Free trauma-informed care, remedies that directly address psychological and emotional trauma. Our collective trauma plays out every single day. You see it in the form of divisiveness. You also see it in the form of not being able to make it through this week because a massacre just happened a week ago, right? Free education. We were getting killed for knowing how to read. It should all be free. Remedies that actually speak to specific gendered impacts that were specific to Black women and the survival of what it takes to even still be here as a Black woman in particular. An official apology would be nice, you know, and I would, in every other reparations case from the federal government, there has been official apology that has accompanied that. And I believe why they haven't issued the apology and stated their full culpability is because that opens them up to legal jurisdiction. It's the same thing that city of Tulsa and other perpetrators in the massacre are doing right now. And lastly, I will say, you know, a pillar of reparative justice within the international framework are guarantees of non-repetition. And that frankly means, you know, this does not happen again. But I think that, you know, institutional reforms and legal reforms actually speak to something that has been practiced for a long time, and those are abolition practices. And if there are institutions that are anti-Black and anti-Asian, why do we want those institutions to still stand as they are? And so, you know, people need to rethink their relationship with abolition and get educated around that work as well, because all of these things are required. I'm listing out a list that's not even comprehensive enough.
Okay, can folks hear me? Okay, sorry, my AirPods died. So of course now my microphone does work. So yes, Miya, would you like to share about what Black reparations means to you?
Yes. Well, first, I really agree with everything that Dreisen said. And ultimately, the decision is in the hands of the Black community. But I do feel it is more than monetary. Don't get me wrong. We need to have a monetary restitution attached to that, because that's money is what means things to people in this country, the leadership in this country. But reparations to me means repairing generations of harms in concrete ways. And that's like all those examples you gave, you know, the redlining that's being addressed in Evanston, Illinois, educational enhancements, scholarship opportunities, support for historically Black colleges, looking at racial disparities in health, especially looking at racial disparities for Black women. Looking at political power. Right now we see they're trying to take away voting rights, and they're messing up on the redistricting, and you know, not to mention what they're doing on a woman's right to choose. So there's just so many moving parts to systemic and institutional racism in this country. And this, you know, as you said, this is the institution that needs to be held accountable for all of this. So it's more than money. It's looking at the system and taking it, you know, each area at a time. And of course, standing together and dismantling white supremacy, which has just been growing so strong. But as a Japanese American, what does Black reparations mean to me? It's like, it's a logical extension. It's a logical continuation coming out of, you know, our own struggle. And it's our next chapter as a Japanese American. And I think I've been looking at a lot of the webinars that have been talking to camp survivors, Japanese American camp survivors. And people are coming to the realization that having experienced camp, we have the moral authority to speak out and to talk about this. And having won redress and reparations, in a sense, we have a moral responsibility to fight for Black reparations and to fight for, you know, justice in other communities. And that through this struggle, you know, we found our voice, and that we're using our voice to fight for justice. After 9/11, we stepped forward to defend Muslims against racial profiling, because we've been there, you know, with the ICE detentions and seeing, you know, ICE wanting to open up some of the camps that were kept us, you know, that imprisoned us. We stepped up and fought against that, you know, and like a shout out to Suda for solidarity. And in the fight for reparations, that's, you know, it's part of our, you know, in a sense, bloodline. I am really, I mean, I hate how this has taken over 30 years for the legislation to go through, and I'm really behind the new strategy of trying to work on an executive order. An executive order was what put JAs in camp. An executive order was the road to Japanese American imprisonment. So let's have an executive order be a road to Black reparations.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much, Miya. I know that, you know, we've been going for 2 hours here. Appreciate all the folks who have continued to stay on, but I really want to make sure that we get to hear from Akemi and Kenniss as well on what does Black reparations mean to them to close this part of the program. So Akemi, can you share, and then we'll close it off with Kenniss?
Sure. I just want to say, I think Dreisen and Miya really hit on all the issues. It's so comprehensive. I mean, it's not even possible to name them all here, all the things that need to be addressed. But I think it's important, in terms of solidarity, right? And as you know, as Yuri would say, she learned from Malcolm about knowing our history. I think it's really important. People saying, how can we be supportive? You could really study, do your research, learn your history, get educated about HR 40, promote HR 40, right? Talk about it, learn about it. I think that's really important. I also just want to say, Yuri, because of the kind of work she was in, she was working and supporting and advocating for Black reparations way before she was involved in the Japanese American reparations movement. And she always said from the very beginning and throughout, she always said that as people, who are BIPOC or in solidarity with BIPOC communities, that Black reparations should be our priority. It should be our first priority before Japanese American reparations. Anyone else, because of the immense level of violence and disenfranchisement. If you calculate that, if you could calculate that, right? It's hard to calculate, right? All the ways and all the damage and all the violence, but it certainly surpasses anything that Japanese Americans or other groups have experienced in this country. The only thing comparable is Indigenous people, right? So I definitely, I just want to be really clear that, while she was involved with J reparations, she was far more involved and committed to Black reparations consistently and always to the very end. So I think in terms of solidarity, understanding that that's where your priority should be is really critical and important.
Okay, Kenniss.
Yes. Wow. What's left to say? Dreisen, Akemi, and Miya have definitely covered everything. So I have a couple of things. First of all, President Biden, when he was on the campaign trail, he spoke and indicated his support for reparations. He has not met that commitment. More important than that, he said his first act would be that he would be working to dismantle systemic racism. And we know that has not been the case, because in almost in about a year and a half, we should be much farther along if he is working vigorously to dismantle systemic racism. So again, in unity, we have to be able to remind the president of his commitments to the people. And in addition to that, as far as what does Black reparations look like, the entire of reparatory justice, I want to say two things. I did an interview a couple of days ago, and the question was, can you agree that reparations equals freedom and freedom equals reparations? That was a really difficult, actually, I don't think I answered it, because I said, I don't know what reparations looks like. And I don't really think I know what freedom looks like. And if I don't know what freedom looks like, and I don't know what reparations look like, I cannot say that one equals the other. So for me, I'm still struggling to be able to say that if I got reparations, I would be free. Or if someone told me I was free, then that would be an indication that I had reparations. So last thing I want to say is, I have a community I've adopted in St. Mary's Parish in Louisiana. They're elderly people, and I'm going to tell you what reparations would look like for them. They exist on $200 a month in SSI benefits. They receive $15 a month in food stamps. It's the SNAP program. They live in trailers that are 45 to 55 to 60 years old. Half the trailers have been deemed by the insurers as uninhabitable because they have been through so many hurricanes and so many tornadoes. So I'm going to speak in their voice. What reparations would look like for them would be, they would no longer be trying to exist on $200 a month when their utility bills have jumped to $389, when they have to get sick and have the ambulance come take them to the hospital so they can get some medication, because the medication is prohibitively priced and out of their price range, but they live in what's considered to be Cancer Alley. So I'm going to not speak on what it would look like for me. I'm going to speak on what it would look like for them. They would be able to exist because they would have a livable income. They would be able to exist because they would not be in a situation where today they don't have food in their house. And they're wondering where they're going to get food from. As recent as day before yesterday, because it's 90-some degrees there, one of the elderly members passed out from heat stroke and suffered a heart attack and had to go to the hospital. But when they looked in her refrigerator, she had no food. So if we want to talk about what it really looks like, then I want to bring it up front, so that it's not about me and it's not about other people. It's about a community of people who earn their livings in the sugarcane fields and in the orchards, and are indeed the low wage earners of society. They should not be treated as the scum of the earth because they were the low wage earners of society. So I want to thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kenniss, for closing us out with that. And it is about centering the community and the people who are really being directly impacted in the day-to-day. And so I'm really happy and glad that you have uplifted that. And so, I just want to say a big thank you to Kenniss, Dreisen, Akemi, and Miya for being with me today to talk about the movement for Black reparations and how Japanese Americans can show up in solidarity. All of your insights have been so amazing, so thoughtful, and I appreciate everything that each of you shared, and I'm looking forward to going back and reflecting myself and seeing how we can continue to take all that you shared into the strategies and the work that the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition is doing. And yeah, thank you so much. I think we're going to briefly, very, very briefly, talk about what's going on for the week of action, and then say our farewell for the day. And also thank you for all that have stayed on with us during this time as well. Yes, so, Tracy mentioned at the beginning of the program that today's conversation and what we heard were to better get us informed so that we can then continue to build skills and then officially take action on Wednesday, just one of the many actions that we hope to take over this year and for as long as this fight and struggle continues. And so on Monday, we're going to be having a National Nikkei Reparations Coalition workshop where we will discuss the strategies of the HR 40 Coalition and also what is our plan for our joint action on May 25th. And that will be led by Kathy Masaoka with NP and NCRR, and also Susan Hayase with San Jose Nikkei Resistors, and also has done lots of work with NCRR as well. The joint action, different organizations from the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition will be hosting, but in addition, we're really excited to be joined by Democrats Abroad Reparations Task Force and the Dems Abroad Global API Caucus, and also Reparations for Slavery organization. Other orgs that will be working with us that are part of the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition include JCL chapters, Sudi for Solidarity, Nikkei Progressives, and NYDOR. And so if folks are ready to take action, we've been called on to take action. And I hope that after hearing from the panelists today, you're ready to fight with us. I think Zara is going to drop the link to how you can register for the workshop and also participate in the joint action on May 25th. And I also want to, really uplift the work of the HR 40 Coalition and to share that we are in partnership with them. This week of action, including this program today, would not be possible without the guidance of, folks in the HR 40 Coalition, especially Kenniss, Dreisen, Jarrett Smith, and also Reverend Mark Thompson. And I want to say a huge thank you to all the folks who helped make this program happen. That includes our amazing speakers, Kenniss, Dreisen, Miya, and Akemi, musicians John, Jang, and James Newton, my fellow co-host Tracy, also the program organizers, which include Miya and Lisa Doi, the tech folks, June and Zara, and then the folks who helped create this communications, which is the communications to promote this program, including Kelly, Komarita, and also June. And with that, I think Zara will share in the chat how you can join the National Nikkei Reparations Coalition. We're trying to create a network. We want to be loud. We want to get as many people in this coalition to mobilize and take action and speak up in support of Black reparations. And we're looking towards other Japanese American organizations and folks to join us to really say that our community is standing for Black reparations now, and it's been far too long. And so, we have dozens of organizations, Japanese American organizations, that have already joined the coalition, and we look forward to be joined by more and continuing to build power in support of Black reparations. So thank you all for joining us. Such appreciation for everyone who stayed on this whole time to hear such amazing information and calls from the speakers. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.